evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever the fuck you're tuning in. This is our second in a series of All-Star Game Drafts episode of Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. We got plenty of topics on the agenda tonight, but the star of the show will be us drafting the Western Conference for this year's All-Star Game. Bentley, how you doing, man?
If I were to tell you that at whatever job you are employed at, that you had a 70% success rate and management came to you and said, thanks, but no thanks, bud, I imagine you would feel pretty shitty. So I'm doing better than that person today.
Yes. Ryan, how about you?
I'm good, man. Happy to be here as always. Uh, yeah, I think the 70% success rate is, depending on the field, is pretty good. Like if you're a surgeon, that's probably not great, but
Well,
you probably shouldn't be doing that.
In professional sports, though,
That's
a pretty damn good percentage.
Yes, it is. Yep.
No matter what sport you're talking about, at 70%. So,
Yep.
So we're going to talk about that in a moment, but we got a little bit of trade news to talk about first out the gates here. It's that season we're kind of closing in on when it heats up usually for the NBA, but we've had a couple of decently high-profile moves so far, and the latest in this sequence of moves, the Heat have acquired Terry Rozier from the Charlotte Hornets in exchange for Kyle Lowry and a 2027 protected first-round pick. The protection on that is if it's in the lottery, it'll convert to a 2028 pick. So the Heat give up what they probably assume won't be a lottery pick and a player who is probably not in the plans for them longer term for a guy who's a little bit younger, probably brings them a little bit more of a scoring threat, at least in their current iterations, or at least in their current state in their career between Rozier and Lowry. I'm really curious to hear how you guys feel about the fit, because Terry's a guy who's been productive for the most part in his time in the NBA, but it seems like he often, with a kind of short stint where he was scary Terry for the Celtics, he's kind of been an afterthought in maybe a lot of people's minds. And it doesn't help that he went to Charlotte and they haven't had any success. So I understand that, but they moved on pretty quick in Boston for him. Obviously, they brought in Kyrie Irving, and things went the way they went. But I'm really curious to hear your guys' perspective on fit with Terry Rozier going from the Hornets to the Heat. Ryan, I'm going to start with you, man. What are your thoughts here on this trade for the Heat, especially because they're the ones in contention, right? The Hornets are not. They're moving a guy that's not in their long-term plans, getting a little more draft capital. What are your thoughts here on this trade, though?
I agree with you on the Hornets. Just to address it, I think trade the assets that you have, which they don't have a ton. LaMelo Ball's like their guy, and Brandon Miller's their guy, and then figure it out from there, kind of thing. Mark Williams probably too once he's healthy. But for the Heat, I like the trade. I think Terry Rozier's having probably like the best season of his career, I would say. He's been extremely effective shooting the ball. I think he's got a crazy high effective field goal percentage right now compared to the rest of his career. So I expect some regression, but if they can get close to that of what he's doing this year, they're going to feel pretty good, I think. His usage will drop off, so you hope with that the efficiency stays the same. But I think it's pretty good. I think it's a decent fit. I think it's kind of they need some help at the guard position. They lost a lot of guards in free agency. They need guys who can handle the ball a little bit more. I think Rozier can do that. I think he could score on his own. I don't think the Heat have a ton of guys who can do that, create their own shot. I think that'll be valuable to them. I think they kind of have like a 3-level attack now. I know people will consider Tyler Hero kind of like their back court attack guy, but I think they really have a full front court, the wing, and the back court that kind of can hit all three of those spots and hit you from different ways. Also, some shooting, like I mentioned. I think that's a big thing for the Heat, is some ability to shoot the ball. Terry does a good job of that. I also think he's a fiery guy. I think he brings good energy. I think he'll fit in Miami because of that. And the last thing I'll say is a guy who gets a good decent amount of steals. It opens the game up a little bit in that way. Pick some pockets, play the passing lanes, get some easy buckets. Heat not known for doing that a ton, outside of like Jimmy Butler doing that. So I think it'd be good to have another guy that can do that. And I think defensively they'll be. You'll have to be careful passing around the backcourt with them. Both those guys hawking around. So I think it's a pretty good fit. I think it was a need for them because they're strong. Really at the bigs and the forward position and need some help at the guard spot. So and it was pretty cheap for a guy who's playing as well as he is. If they get that guy all year, then they saved a lot of capital for sure. I don't think they will because his usage rate is, I think, career high right now, and there's no way that stays up while he's with Miami. But as long as they get the efficiency that he's having, they'll feel really good about that trade.
Bentley, what do you think?
Yeah, Ryan made a lot of good points. I tend to agree with most of them. However, my favorite part of this trade was the Photoshop edit that I saw someone make. The Miami Heat court in the lanes, they had printed out most professional, hardest working, all of these 2-word phrases, and then somebody photoshopped on top of that scariest terrorist to go along with the rest of the phrases. That was my favorite part of the trade. But in terms of the basketball aspect and on the court, Scary Terry Rozier, he was a dog in college. I remember him in Louisville. Was a very, very good player there. He has a lot of playoff experience from his years in Boston, and I think that qualifies him to be basically a perfect fit for Heat culture down in Miami, obviously. Ryan mentioned he's a – I don't know if he said this specifically, but I'm going to say it. He's an above-average off-ball defender. Ryan talked about it's going to be a little more difficult to have clean passing lanes while playing against Miami. Miami is – every single year, they're a very good defensive team because they play very solid team defense. Obviously, Bam is an incredible defender, and Jimmy Butler at times, especially in the playoffs, is able to flip that switch and become an elite-level defender. I'm not saying that Terry Rozier is an elite-level defender, but he's definitely an above-average off-ball defender. He knows his spacing very well. He learned from Brad Stevens how to play good defense, so we know what he could do with the coaching ability, or his coaching ability, right? The shooting Ryan mentioned as well. Terry Rozier is extremely efficient this season on a team in Charlotte who's not very good. So he's able to bring that offensive and defensive prowess down to Miami, and I think it's a perfect fit there. They take a little bit of the scoring onus off of Tyler Hero if they want to play those two guys together. They've only played one game since the trade. I'm not sure. I should have gone and looked at the minutes logged. I'm not entirely sure how Spo is going to run the rotations, if Terry's expected to be a starter, if he's going to be a secondary, like a second team guy and play with Tyler Hero and the bench mafia. But I trust Spo to figure it out. If there's one coach in the league who could pick up off-season additions and make it work, or mid-season additions rather than off-season, sorry. Bring in guys mid-season is Spo. He's going to make it work. I really like the fit there. And like Ryan said, he made a lot of good points. They didn't give up a whole ton. They gave up a massive Kyle Lowry contract to make this deal, which I think was really good for the Heat to get off of. And it only cost them a first-round pick, which in Miami, you're going to be picking in the 20s anyways, more than likely, so it's not that big of a deal. But I really like the pick for Miami, or excuse me, the trade for Miami.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have any other points, and I don't have any counterpoints. I think it is a good fit. I think you guys nailed it in terms of like how he fits and what he brings to Miami. I wanted to bring up the fact that the off-ball defense, and that's kind of what makes Miami pesky, right? They're really good at rotating and switching and clogging up lanes, clogging up passing lanes, and that was, I think, what gave, at least in the Eastern Conference, what gave teams fits last year in the playoffs. Not so much in Denver because you got the best pick and roll combination in the league and the best passing big man who can basically just see over all of those pesky defenders from Miami. So I think this kind of adds to it, but also they get younger. He's on a very, as Ryan mentioned, a very team-friendly contract. You mentioned how expensive Lowry was. Bentley, I think this helps them with flexibility with money. We know they've got the Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero contracts that they're still trying to balance as well. Maybe this sets them up possibly with a little bit of spending cash this coming offseason as well to keep this thing going. And as you know, you both pointed out, and I mentioned early on that I don't expect that 2027 pick to be a lottery pick anyway. And I wouldn't expect in 2028 for them to be giving up a very high pick either when it converts. So I think it's a good deal. I don't know that it moves the balance of power in the East necessarily, but I think it's a very good fit, a very Heat-like move if if you're considering what the Heat usually do in terms of roster construction. So, all right, well, moving on, we alluded to it to start the show, and in very surprising news, we hadn't really even heard like rumblings of discontent in Milwaukee, but Adrian Griffin is out after a over 70% winning percentage start to the season at 30-13. And after the news of the firing, we start to hear there's maybe some discontent with how Dame's been used in the offense. Giannis maybe button heads a little bit with Adrian Griffin. If you believe the internet and the memes, button heads about the fact that Adrian Griffin claims that Thanasis is stealing insurance by being on an NBA roster. We're not here to break that as news. It was funny. But they move on and they pay Doc Rivers $40 million over the next 3.5 years to replace Adrian Griffin. I have to assume, and I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on kind of what this means and where Milwaukee's at. I have to assume that Doc Rivers was the guy to get the nod because he's got a history of handling big personalities, a history of handling multiple big personalities on rosters, and he's got a championship ring. However you feel about that championship in terms of what Doc brought to the table, considering he had 3 Hall of Famers and probably the smartest basketball player to ever play the game. One of the hardest people to coach, but a very, very savvy and smart Rajon Rondo was the engine of that offense. I have to believe that has everything to do with the Bucks tapping Doc Rivers, who was making a fool of himself on national TV almost nightly as well. So I'm not disappointed that I won't have to listen to him on NBA broadcasts. I don't know how anybody else feels about it. I am not a big fan of Doc Rivers on the mic. I also know that Doris Burke, with her reactions to some of the things that Doc Rivers says, is probably not a fan of Doc Rivers on the mic either. So have fun in Milwaukee, Doc. I don't want to listen to you anymore. But I do want to get your guys' thoughts on Doc Rivers as the coach taking over for Adrian Griffin in Milwaukee. Bentley, I want to start with you this time.
Sure. Everything that we know about Doc Rivers says that he's a wonderful regular season coach, right? He's a guy that wins a ton of games. He's incredible with superstars in the NBA. Sans Ben Simmons, who take it or leave it, but at the time when Doc Rivers was coaching, going into that Atlanta series, and I believe 17, Ben Simmons was a superstar in the NBA. I think that was kind of the onus of why they brought Doc Rivers in. If you want to get into why Adrian Griffin was relieved of his duties, you can go back to the beginning of the season when he got into it with Terry Stotts. And Terry Stotts was dismissed from the program. If you read the story, they kind of got into a tiff at a practice one day, and Adrian Griffin kind of upstaged Terry Stotts, who's a very respected veteran coach in the NBA. I think that he kind of did that to establish, it's going to sound very cliche, but establish his dominance over the team, right? Like, I'm the head coach. I know that Stotts is here. He's been a guy. Now, and this was even before Damian Lillard was on the team. But he wanted to prove that he was the head coach and he wasn't going to be subverted by, one of his subordinates. And so Terry Stotts was gone. Then they bring in Dame, and Dame's upset about his usage, especially on the defensive end of the floor. There's some learning curve with bringing in another superstar to your program. There's a ton of reports saying that they hated the way the defensive end of the court was working, right? They're currently 19th in defensive efficiency in the NBA, so they're in the bottom half. The biggest change from Budenholzer to Adrian Griffin this year was that they stopped playing drop coverage with Brook Lopez, right? Brook Lopez in drop coverage was a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year like 2 years in a row, where they had Drew Holiday at the point of attack, but they still had Giannis kind of floating around doing anything he wanted, not necessarily guarding the best player on the biggest possessions, but that wasn't the defensive system that Budenholzer had in place, right? They were allowing Giannis to free range and do his thing while playing Brook Lopez when in pick and roll situations, she would just drop on everything and guard the rim. Well, Adrian Griffin comes in and doesn't do that. He's like, we're going to play straight up. We're not going to play Brook in drop. We're going to make him run out and guard and close out and keep him away from the rim. And it was working in the favor of the offense, right? We talk about gambling a lot, you and I, Gary, especially the overs on these Milwaukee teams is incredible because they're scoring the number one in offensive efficiency and they're 19th in defensive efficiency. You do the math, a shitload of points are being scored in all of these games. Now they have, I believe they're tied for the second best record in the entire NBA, which is incredible, right? 30-13. But if the team, especially these superstars in the team, who you're paying the most amount of money to, specifically Giannis and Dame, are unhappy with a coach where they don't believe the philosophy. They say, Giannis had that quote on January 6th, I think it was, where even the laundry guy or the equipment guy has to wash the clothing better, right? Like the superstars in the team were not buying into the head coach. And I think as terrible as it is to be paying 3 head coaches, which is currently what the Milwaukee Bucks are doing, they're paying Bud, they're paying Adrian Griffin, and they're paying now Doc Rivers $40 million. As awful as it is to pay 3 head coaches, I admire what the ownership group did in taking at least some sort of stance saying, hey, we're standing with our superstar players. They're telling us that the head coach is not connecting with the locker room, that he's not connecting with the roster. We're going to go with our guys that have been here forever, and we're going to take their word, and we're going to move on from this guy and bring in someone who Doc Rivers had already been working as an unpaid consultant, which is a little strange, right? I've never heard of anything like that happening before. At least somebody who's so like in the NBA lexicon, right? But that aside, they're bringing in somebody who is an established NBA coach. Postseason record aside, we can get into that in a little bit if we want to. But they're bringing in someone who is very good with superstars and who the team is, I would assume, going to buy into, and who they think gives them the best chance to win a title.
Yeah, for sure. I like the point you made there about ownership too, right? Because we often see where ownership's reluctant to fire a guy. We watched Brandon Staley. I'm going to use the NFL as a couple of examples here. We watched the Chargers keep Brandon Staley around for probably 2 seasons too long because they're cheapskates. And the Vegas Raiders had the same situation when they fired Gruden and were paying him. There was a lot of reporting that they were reluctant to fire Josh McDaniels because of money as well. To see Milwaukee now have 3 coaches basically on the payroll and only 1 in the building, that tells you how invested they are in both winning, but also we talked about it a lot this offseason, how much they're invested in keeping Giannis in Milwaukee, right? They are doing everything. They're going above and beyond, giving him a superstar in the trade for Dame, giving him now a player-friendly head coach that has some ilk in the league, a lot of respect in the league, and a guy who has a title, right? For all the backhanded stuff I said about Doc, a few minutes ago, he's still a guy that's widely respected in the league and a guy that you assume is going to have a good relationship here with the superstar on the roster, because that's what Doc Rivers has been wherever he's gone, right? He's been a guy that can handle those personalities, can kind of cater to those superstars. And, you have to tip your cap to the Bucks because they're willing to make that move. I like that point you made. Ryan, what are your thoughts here on this move by the Milwaukee Bucks?
I won't belabor the point too much. I think you all both brought up good points, to use the word again. What I will say is I think it is the right move, and the big reason I think it's the right move is because it's an aging roster that unfortunately for Griffin is not in a position to let him grow as a coach. I think he should get another chance. That's what I'll throw out there. I think he was just put in a bad spot where unless you're just some super gifted phenom, like as a first head coach, like that was never going to work out. I think the Bucks should have known that. I don't think it's Griffin's fault. Really, like Bentley said, a lot of this is defensive problems. Their defense is almost as bad as the Pacers, with some of the the best individual defenders in the league, hypothetically, on that team. And I know Dame is not a good defender, but I don't think it makes you that bad uh, of a defensive team. So that's all I want to say is I think it's good that they accelerated the timeline, get a coach who wants to win right now, who has the experience to do it, and I hope that Griffin gets a second opportunity, like I said, somewhere else, maybe on a team that's rebuilding. Let him kind of figure out what his philosophy is, what he's going to do, because I think offensively he's got the talent to coach. It's just, is his defensive scheme good? Does it need different personnel, or does he need a defensive assistant coach, or something like that's something that needs to be figured out for him. But yeah, hope he gets a second chance. Think it was the right move, and I think Doc Rivers is a lot better playoff coach than people give him credit for. His playoff percentage is not awful, and I don't really think he's that bad. I think he has had teams that were really, really talented, and people are like, you should obviously win the championship with that team, but only one team wins the championship. So, I don't really, begrudge him for, I think he made the conference semis 4 years in a row before he stopped coaching. Yeah, I'd consider that relatively successful. Maybe a lot of people are championship or bust, but I don't really look at it that way. Yeah, I think he's talented. I think he'll be good over there, especially defensively. And I do agree that he's coached superstars many, many times. Some of the biggest personalities, like the Garnetts and the Embiids of the world. And I think he'll be fine with Giannis, who I don't think is that big of a personality.
Yeah, I think some of the consideration for his playoff success or non-success is the fact that he's had a lot of these superstars, right? He's had Embiid, he's had 3 Hall of Famers, he's had Harden, he's had Chris Paul, he's had a lot of big time superstars, that he's had under his tutelage. And as you can see in Bentley's byline, more than once he's had a 3-1 lead in a playoff series and lost. So it is interesting in terms of what Doc's going to bring to the table. I think this Bucks team is very, very talented, but I'm going to take a very small victory lap right now, and understand when I take this victory lap that Doc may fix this, and it may have been just Adrian Griffin's approach defensively. But when the trade news broke for bringing Dame in and losing Jrue Holiday, I mentioned that offense wasn't their problem last year, and it's still not their problem this year. They weren't tough enough when it mattered in the playoffs. They got bullied in the playoffs. Giannis got nicked up in that series, but they are fucking demonstrably worse on defense this year, and only really one thing has changed on that roster. Now, the coaching scheme, like I said, I fully understand that in 2 weeks I may be apologizing to Doc Rivers and the Bucks and saying it was Adrian Griffin, but man, they are much, much worse defensively this year than they were last year. Bentley, I think you were going to chime back in.
I was just going to say that he did in 2021 have the number 1 seed in the East and lost to the 5 seed Atlanta Hawks. So this is not going to be shocking, but I disagree with Ryan. I don't think Doc Rivers is a good postseason coach. I don't necessarily think he's a bad coach, but he's kind of middle of the road in my opinion. Gary, you mentioned the title that he won in 2009 with the Celtics. I mean, they had at least 4 Hall of Famers on that roster. I would argue that Rondo, he doesn't have the counting stats, but he's a Hall of Fame level player in my mind. He's one of my favorite players of all time. There are coaches that we talk about in every sport, right? Doing more with less. I don't think Doc falls into that category of doing more with less. I think Doc, on occasion, does less with the most.
Yeah,
that's just my opinion.
No, I'm in your corner on that. I think Doc is a mediocre coach when it comes to postseason coaching. I watch him get out coached in May almost every year in these series. It's tough when he's mismanaging personnel and mismanaging time down the stretch in these games. It's like, is Doc Is Doc a person like? Is he a guy that should just be like a bench coach and just be the rah guy to manage personalities? I don't know, right? And by no stretch am I saying Doc would just be a bench coach, but
Sure.
I think he's much better in terms of managing personalities than it is being an X's and O's guy in a playoff series and when it matters. So, yeah. All right.
Even this year, there's real world examples of this occurring, right? We have the Clippers and we have the Sixers, right? James Harden was previously on the Sixers, now on the Clippers. They are thriving with him playing in a lesser role than he did under Doc Rivers in the Sixers. And we have Tyrese Maxey. Now, understandably, James Harden is gone, right? So he's going to be elevated nonetheless. But like Tyrese Maxey has taken an incredible jump. The All-Star starters just came out, he's not a starter, but he's an All-Star player, right? He was not that under Doc Rivers. Again, it's not exactly apples to apples, but like seeing James Harden thrive in a lesser role where he agreed to take that lesser role, likely because the coach convinced him that that's how basketball games were going to be won, where Doc couldn't do that and could not elevate Tyrese Maxey to be a more prominent player within the Sixers organization last year when he was there. I don't know, to me, it just seems like a more relevant example of Doc not being able to manage the personnel that he has underneath of him. That's just how I view that personally.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the statement you made there, Bentley, kind of speaks for itself, right? Doing more with less or doing less with more can kind of be the make or break thing on whether you're a coach, especially in crunch time. All right, moving on. Let's get to the main course of our meal here tonight. We're going to get to the Western Conference All-Star Game. We are going to do our draft, and we're going to go around the horn as we did last week. Bentley, you started last week. I'm going to switch it up this week, and we'll go Ryan, and then Bentley, and then myself. I'll go last again. I don't mind being last in the championship. So, Ryan, you are on the clock for first choice for All-Star starters in the Western Conference.
I'm going to take the guy who's most deserving, and I'm going to take Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as my first pick. Lethal guy on a really good team. I think he's been the best backcourt player in the West this year. I think Doncic is close, but I think SGA edges him over with his defense because he's a better defender. I think by a decent margin. And I think he's been really good and the best player on one of the best teams in the West. There's not really much to say outside of I think he's an obvious pick.
Yeah, he's a slam dunk. There's probably 3 names you might have if you consider for the first pick here, and he's definitely one of them. The leader on that OKC team that is either overachieving or at least achieving what they should, depending on how you viewed them coming into this season. They're one of the best teams in the West, one of the best teams in the NBA. They've got a really deep roster, really young, exciting roster, and Shai is clearly the leader on that team, and does it night in and night out, putting up a ton of stats. Really good defender as well. Bentley, any thoughts on Shai? Any contrary thoughts on Shai?
No, I mean he's clearly the best player on the number 1 seed in the West. I mean you can't. There's no taking that away from him, right? He's a true NBA development story. When he got drafted, I don't know that anyone expected this from him, but he has proven all of the doubters wrong, and he's absolutely incredible.
For sure. All right, well, on that, you're on the clock, Bentley. Number 2 pick.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a guy who I talk about quite often. He's one of my favorite players that I've ever watched, right? And that is saying something because I don't necessarily love the way that he plays the game. I just love the amount of skill and talent that he portrays every single night on the court. I'm going to take Luka Doncic. Luka's averaging 34, 9, 9, and 1.5 steals a game. I'll let the stat line speak for itself. Like, that's just simply incredible. He does it in the regular season. We know he does it in the playoffs. I mean, he owns the Clippers organization as a whole. Like, Steve Ballmer should be writing him checks. It's crazy. He's truly incredible, and I think he's an absolute blast to watch.
Sure. One of those guys I would have lumped in for the conversation of going first overall. Really fun to watch. What are your thoughts on him getting a fan kicked out last night for cursing? Does that at all demerit his worthiness of being the number 2 pick in the All-Star game for the Western Conference?
So I read the report on that and like the kind of the post game whatever, somebody asked him about it and he was like, yeah, he was chirping at me all night long, like cussing him out. And it was a Suns fan in Dallas, right? And so he was cursing at him all throughout the first half, and then in the second half, he yelled at me. He said, "Luka, get on the treadmill. You're tired." It's like, all right, man. You've been going at it all fucking game. Like, relax. Your team's winning. Like, calm down, brother. It's okay. I don't ever love getting a fan kicked out unless there's a physical altercation. Sticks and stones, right? Like, let them say what they're going to say. And even he said that. He's like, I didn't want to do it. Like, he paid for the seat, but, it just got to a point where it's too much. So, it's hard to say if it were me, I would do this, but, I'm going to say it anyways. If it were me, I wouldn't care necessarily, right? But, there's a level of frustration that you just surpass sometimes. You can't come back from.
I think he let a little frustration of the score of the game get to him too. So, I think it's a soft ass fucking move. I never like players specifically trying to get fans kicked out of games unless they're throwing racial slurs at you or talking about your family and things like that. Unless it's like you said, a physical altercation, leave that alone because the fans drive the fact that the NBA players can make what they make is because of the fans that pay for seats, fans that tune in on TV, and all of the money that comes in via those big TV deals. So I never like this. Russ Westbrook has done this before, and I've hated on him for it. LeBron has done it before. I've hated on him for it. I can't stand it when players do this. So for me, it's a very soft thing. Ryan, what are your thoughts on Luka?
I think is the other obvious backcourt pick. You could argue that he's been better than SGA this year. Like I said, I think the defense is the separator for me. I think Luka is a slightly better offensive player, but I think SGA is a significantly better defensive player. So I think that's my only reason for taking SGA over him. But yeah, both those guys should be the backcourt starters.
Nice. All right, well, I'm going to go with the other guy that I would have had in the conversation for number 1 overall, and that's Nikola Jokic. I think he's still the best basketball player on the planet in terms of totality of the package that you get with him. Being a big man who is the cog within the offense that makes it go, his passing ability, his ability to just easily put up 30-point triple-doubles, it seems like almost nightly. I still think he's the best player in the league. And I think he should be on his 3rd consecutive defending MVP run, but things kind of changed last year when the sentiment swung and it seemed like he started to take a couple of nights off. So Nikola Jokic for me, got to be in the starting lineup in the West. Bentley, what are your thoughts on Jokic?
Yeah, I agree. He's probably the best player in the world right now. It's a very, very close margin though between him and Embiid. If you tell me Embiid's better, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you right now. It'll be interesting to see just in terms of number of games played going down the stretch who wins the MVP, because I believe Embiid is on pace to miss that by 2 games. But yeah, Jokic should be a starter. He will be a starter in the All-Star game. I 100% agree.
Ryan, any objections to Jokic?
No, I don't need to add anything to that.
Top player in the West?
At least.
All right, bud, you're back on the clock. Who's our fourth starter in the All-Star game for the West?
I'll leave Bentley's favorite player available for him because I'm a nice guy like that, and I know who he wants to take. I'll take in the front court. I really think there's three guys who are vying for two positions here. I'll take the guy that I think has been just slightly better. I'll take Kawhi Leonard as the starter, though he's missed more games than the other guy I would have taken. I think he's having a better year, and I think I hate to say the records helped him too. I think turning those Clippers teams around, not by himself, but with some of the other players as well, has looked really good. He's shooting the ball super effectively. I think he's in the 50-40 range right now. Yeah, he's shooting 44% from three, 52% from the field. If he could just get his 88% free throws up, man, he'd be good. So he's been pretty lethal. I know I've said that already with SGA, but I think Kawhi's has been really good and one of the obvious front court guys.
Yeah. Surprised me a little bit that he would make the starting lineup. I think he is worthy of it. I thought he would have been kind of, maybe when Bentley got to the fifth pick, it would have been between him and maybe another player or two. But I don't disagree with any of the points you made, though. I think Kawhi is still one of the best players in the league when healthy, when on the court. And I think this year we've seen a very different Kawhi because the NBA, I think because the NBA has put the onus on the players to enough of this fucking load management stuff. The fans pay a lot of money to come to these games. Get your ass on the court, right? We're making a lot of money on these TV deals, and fans are tuning in and turning off the TV set because Kawhi's not playing, because Paul George's not playing, right? And it shows, right, in what he's been able to do in terms of production. So I don't have any qualms with it. I am surprised he cracked the starting lineup in our draft, but I don't have any qualms with it. Bentley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, similar to you, I did not have him in my starting five, but that's simply because this is an all-star game and not who are the five best players in the West. I believe he's been one of the five best players in the West all season long. We're kind of seeing vintage Kawhi this year. And he's playing with a cast around him of winning players, right? Like guys who know – we talked about the Clippers a lot, right, especially throughout trade season. But these are all guys who know how to win. They've been there. They've won that. There are two MVPs on this roster that are not named Kawhi. That being said, it is an all-star game. I'm probably not going to pick him in starting lineup for an all-star team, but I firmly believe he's one of the five best players in the West this season.
Yeah, all-NBA team, certainly. All-star game, we're talking a little different. I agree. All right, Bentley, round out our starting lineup for us, bud.
I'm going to take a player who's very near and dear to my heart, someone I have been a fan of since he was in high school, since I used to go down and watch him. That is none other than the Slim Reaper, Mr. KD35 himself, the 7-foot assassin, Kevin Durant. He's playing on a team that has been somewhat underachieving right now. They suffered some injury streaks, especially Bradley Beal early in the year. But Kevin Durant is averaging 29 points a game, 6.5 rebounds, 6 assists, and he's shooting 45, almost 46% from three this year. I mean, that's insane. His career average is less than 40. He's a 39% career average three-point shooter, and he's shooting almost 46%. Like that's, and he's not doing it on low shot attempts, right? Like he's shooting just as much as he always does. But God, he's been so good. He had 40 the other night and didn't shoot a free throw. Like that's hard to do. Ryan and I talked about this a lot. Like that's hard to do. I love Kevin Durant. I'm gonna put him in the starting lineup of any. You tell me name 5 starters. I don't care what game we're playing. I'm putting Kevin Durant in it.
Yeah, I can't disagree necessarily with Kevin Durant. I think he's a phenomenal player, and he's going to be fun to watch in an All-Star game, right? Because he can score from everywhere. I think that they have a lot of bad kind of bugaboo luck this year with injuries and three stars not playing. Surprisingly, they've got health from Nurkic, right? And I'll knock on wood, right? I don't want to jinx that for Suns fans because that's not normal, but they've gotten health from him. It's been the other guys that haven't been in the lineup on a nightly basis. They're a very dangerous team. But I think this selection by you speaks to what Kevin Durant still means to basketball fans, right? He's that guy. He can score from everywhere. He's going to be exciting to watch in an All-Star game. Ryan, how do you feel about Kevin Durant being the fifth of our starters in the Western Conference?
Does my mic sound a little better?
Yeah, that's a little better.
I turned it all the way. Yeah, I turned it all the way down. Yeah, he's an obvious pick. He's pretty good at basketball, is what I hear.
He's pretty good.
I think there's probably two other guys. Actually, there's probably four guys that are vying for those spots.
Yep.
I know they've already been picked, but in my mind, there's four guys that are probably qualified for it. But I imagine the other two will get picked later. So.
Yeah, for sure. I've got three that I thought could have cracked the starting five potentially. With my next pick, I'm going to take one of those three that I've got in mind and one of the more fun guys to watch in an All-Star game because he'll shoot, he'll turn around, he'll start dancing, and then the ball goes in because he shot it from the logo and it had that much time to get to the hoop. Steph Curry, who is still shooting and scoring and facilitating at elite levels. He's not the same guy he's been in the past in terms of that quick first step that used to initiate the offense for him, but God, he just doesn't stop. He creates space with his just activity, constantly moving, his ability to move off the ball and score with the ball. We've never seen it, right? And we can say this every single year for the next probably 30 years that we haven't seen a guy like a Steph Curry that can do what he does. The elite shooting ability, the elite ability to shoot off the dribble. There's been a lot of elite shooters in the history of this game, guys like Bird and Reggie Miller and Ray Allen, right? They didn't create off the dribble like this guy does. And it's so fun to watch because he's got elite handles and an elite ability to create separation and get shots up against everybody. You can switch on him. It doesn't matter who's defending him. He's going to create space and he's going to shoot, or he's just going to back up farther than you think he can shoot it, and he's going to shoot it from there. So Steph Curry, for me, first off the bench here in the Western Conference for the All-Star game. He was among, like I said, a group of three guys that I assume are going to get picked pretty quickly here as we go down the list. But I have to get Steph Curry early on here as we're putting this All-Star team together. Ryan, your way first. Any thoughts on Curry? When will we see the end?
Luckily, his skill set lasts a long time typically. I think even if he's a set shooter at the end of his career, he'll be like a serviceable backup if he wants to be till he's like early 40s probably.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he's definitely in great shape. He's been defying, I think, some of the age things. It seems like more guys are doing that. Just modern medicine and modern diet. Yeah, it's just getting
high levels of income in modern medicine.
Yeah, he could live to be 300 years old. Yeah, he's gonna be in the NBA in 2100. Yeah, I think he's an obvious pick as well. I think the West has some pretty obvious ones. I think it's the very end of the team that there's a couple questions, but
yeah, for sure. Yeah, your 2101 sixth man of the year, Steph Curry. I like the point you made about the skill set translating, right? That we're going to be able to watch him probably for the next, is it 8 years, 7 years, 9 years, something along those lines. Reggie Miller makes that point. He's on Dan Patrick quite a bit. And he talks about it because DP's a big basketball fan. He played college basketball, and they talk about it a lot. And Reggie's like, yeah, I mean, I can still go in the gym and light it up, right? But I just can't keep up with guys at that level. So if he ends up a set shooter, like Ryan said at the end of his career, I think he can prolong it probably 2, maybe 3 years before he really starts to become a liability in other ways. Bentley, what are your thoughts on Steph?
Yeah, the point of his skill set translating into his elder statesmanship in the NBA is just brought to light even more by the Ray Allen shot in the NBA Finals in Miami, right? The very famous Mike Breen call. Yeah, I mean, is Steph going to be that maybe at an elevated version, even really. I mean, because he's, you said it, Gary. He's the best shooter ever. What's going to what inhibits every athlete as their career progresses is not the ability to move quickly or run with speed. It's the ability to stop. Right, it's the brakes that go out rather than the accelerator typically, and that truthfully is what Steph Curry's kind of super ability is. Right, his I can't even think of the word. Right, his superpower. There we go.
Yeah, his quick pitch, getting in and out of breaks and cuts and getting around the basket and
exactly. Yeah. Like I will never ever forget I'm going to forget the year, but I'll never forget the play, right? It was a playoff game in New Orleans when Anthony Davis was on the Pelicans, and they get, I believe Steph shot a three, and he's running around trying to get a rebound, and the Warriors get an offensive rebound, and Steph is just streaking to the corner, and they whip the ball to the corner, and Steph is falling. He stops on a dime, catches the ball, in the pocket, ball goes up immediately, and Steph is falling into the stands, and AD is closing out on him, hand outstretched, right? And Steph just makes it. It's late in the fourth quarter, very late in the game, right? And it's like those are the plays that we don't see anybody else in the history of basketball make. Those shots that he hits, and it's nothing but net every single time.
The twine doesn't move.
It's unbelievable the things that man could do on a basketball court, and he probably is deserving of a starting spot on this roster. It's an all-star game. He's going to get the votes, but we all have our opinions, right? And justifiably so, he's coming off the bench, but he absolutely deserves a roster spot.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Ryan, you're back on the clock. Pick number 7.
Oh man. I guess since we're talking about people, not having to worry about time, I'll just take the
get it out of the way.
the greatest modern player of all time, Anthony Davis. LeBron James, his teammate. What is there to say? 20 All-Star games. I mean, it's I know we're just talking about this season, but the longevity is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. He will be the ultimate decider when people think about like peak versus consistency. Like when we talk about this in 20 years and say how great was he, it's always going to be, well, his great seasons were great, but he was great for 2 decades, which is that's never happened before unless you were a 7-footer who just like held on for a long time,
plotted around and stayed under the back.
Yeah, in eras where you could, right? The Moses Malone, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbars, right? Those types of guys. It's just so impressive. I know I'm not saying anything about this season, but I always want to highlight that. And I know he's already a starter. But 20 All-Star games, still probably the best player on his team, pushing 40. It's just
he's like an hour and a half away from 40, right?
Yeah, it's just crazy to me what he does, and every year he's a different player, which is like the other part of it too. It's like I've watched I think like 5 different LeBron Jameses at this point. And I think each one is very unique from the other ones. Like they all learn from each other, but they're all unique. Like he's become almost like a traditional like shoot first wing at this point. And he never was that in his entire career. And the fact that he's an all-star caliber version of that is just crazy to me. So
yeah, for sure. No disagreements here. I know, as you mentioned, you weren't talking a lot about this year necessarily, but I think until he hangs him up, right? This is a guy who's going to get the votes, and he's also a guy you want in the All-Star game, right? It was like, I know I equate things to other sports often, but like Cal Ripken Jr. making the All-Star game late in his career, right? It was like we can't have an All-Star game at the end of this guy's career without this guy in it, right? So LeBron's going to be an All-Star, and he continues to play at a high level. We'll see how long he wants to kind of stick around. I don't see him as a guy who hangs on with a diminished role on a team necessarily. And I know we're not talking too much about this, and I know I was the one that brought it up with Steph, but I don't think we see him kind of hang on a roster. I think we end up seeing him maybe following around if Bronny does make it and stick on an NBA roster. I think that's kind of the role we see with LeBron. He's more of a groupie or a fan, and he's just around the game and influential around the game, and sticks with an organization wherever Bronny ends up. Bentley, what are your thoughts on LeBron?
Yeah, you guys have said so many positive things about him. I am not going to be the negative Nancy that I typically am on this show. I'm just excited to see future owner, player, all-star LeBron James playing for the Las Vegas NBA franchise.
Yeah.
I don't know when that will be, but I guarantee you that LeBron will be on that roster, both regular season and all-star.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, Bentley, you're on the clock again. Pick number 8.
I am on the clock. I'm going to take a player who is maybe the most electric that we've picked so far. Maybe Steph Curry is more electric because he does it from like his shooting, if that's your kind of cup of tea, right? I'm going to take Anthony Edwards. This guy is an absolute showstopper. The springs that this man had loaded into his calf muscles as a child are absolutely unbelievable. I think
that T-Mac dunk he had the other night. Oh my goodness,
dude! Like, it's insane, man.
And I know people called it the Kobe on the highlight reel, but T-Mac did it first, guys.
Yes,
T-Mac did it first.
Yeah, Kobe is not known as an above the rim guy. Like, right. I don't know how you name any dunk
early in his career, but really he transformed his game pretty quickly.
Yeah, like. And Anthony Edwards also excels as a below the rim player. Like, he can do things with putting the ball on the floor, and he's a decent shooter. He's a very good shooter, right? But his highlights come for when he puts it on people's heads. And this is an all-star game. He's not going to put it on anyone's head because they're not going to be playing defense until the Elam ending kicks in. But regardless, he's going to – people talk about dunking and your head going over the rim. I think that when Anthony Edwards dunks, his head goes over the box. Like, it's unreal the things that he does. And he's an even better football player than he is basketball, apparently. So get him out there.
Apparently. According to Anthony Edwards, he's a better football player than a basketball. I can't disagree with Anthony Edwards. I think for an all-star game especially, we're talking about the electricity that we like to see from an all-star game. I think Anthony Edwards brings that. We're going to see quite a few alley-oops and fast break dunks while he's on the floor, without question. And I think he's a perfect pick for an all-star game. Ryan, any dissenting thoughts on Ant-Man getting into the all-star game?
No. Don't really have any. I think he's been really good finally starting to figure out how to play with that team and the way that team is assembled with their bigs. There's some guys I would have before him, but I know these guys are going to make it, even if I don't say it, because y'all know what y'all are talking about. So y'all will pick the people I want to pick. But yeah, that I think he should be in for sure.
I think the most surprising thing to me about Anthony Edwards is that he is so low in voting. I know the names that are in front of him, but like, there's two directly in front of him that if I had a vote, he'd be above those two. This is as of, I want to say, this was a week ago. He was behind Kyrie Irving and behind James Harden. I would have Anthony Edwards ahead of both of them if I had. Right, if it were me just saying this is what the ballot looks like, I would have Anthony Edwards ahead of those two. Maybe the public doesn't know enough about him because he plays in Minnesota. I'm not sure. Maybe he's overshadowed by his teammate. I don't know. But you have to have Anthony Edwards in the All-Star game, in my opinion. All right, my pick next. I am going to go with a guy that I don't love him. I'm not a big fan of this player, but if I'm picking an all-star game and we're talking about the players that can do all the things that we want to see them do during an all-star game, I have to pick Anthony Davis. I think he is a mobile big man who can do a lot of things that we're going to enjoy seeing in an all-star game. I think he's been really integral when the Lakers had their run. It was when Anthony Davis was playing his best. We've seen them kind of struggle here over the last couple of weeks, and that may maybe knock him down in a lot of people's eyes when it comes to the All-Star game. But I think if you're watching a 7-footer who can handle the ball on the fast break, who can shoot the three, who can score at all three levels, and we're going to see probably some poster blocks from him during the All-Star game. I had to give some props to Anthony Davis. It hurts me to say that because I am really, really not a fan of him because of some of the things that come along with him, his personality, his approach to the game, and the fact that he's in street clothes all the fucking time when the games matter. But if we're talking about this season, we're talking about who Anthony Davis is as a player, I'm putting him in the All-Star game. Ryan, what are your thoughts on AD?
He was actually the guy I considered for the front court starter. He was the other guy I considered, so I guess that would tell you how I feel about him. He's really good. People hate on him too much.
I know I do.
Yeah, not just you. I think the pendulum swings a lot with him about how people feel about him. It's like he gets hated on a bunch, and then people are like, "Oh no, he's actually good." And then I think
a basketball player.
And then I think they overrate him, like him being on like like the 75 list and like stuff like that. It's like, yeah, he's probably on the fringe of the list, but like, let's calm down, that type of stuff. So I do think a pendulum, like I said, goes back and forth with him on how we look at him. But I think he's had a good year. And defensively is a big part of that too. Just a solid defender that can put the ball in the basket too. And there's not a lot of guys that can do that at that level.
Bentley, what are your thoughts on AD making the All-Star roster?
Yeah, I'm one of those people that Ryan mentioned that hates on Anthony Davis a lot. I think I'm going to be totally transparent here. I believe a lot of that has to do with him being a Kentucky player. I hold that against guys for a very long time, unless your name is like De'Aaron Fox or Malik Monk or Emmanuel Quickly. But yeah, Anthony Davis is probably deserving of an All-Star spot. He's going to get the votes because he's a Laker, right? I don't know that I would have him as a starter on my All-Star team. I have him on my honorable mention list here, on my list of 12. I'm not opposed to having him on the All-Star roster. You mentioned some of the blocks he probably would get in this game. If he's healthy, that is. But I have no qualms with him being on the Western All-Star roster.
All right. Ryan, back to you as we get to our last round here, our last picks. Pick number 10.
I kind of hate having this pick because there's two guys I want to take here, and I feel like one's not going to make it. Actually, I'm almost 100% sure one's not going to make it. So I could game theory y'all and take that guy, knowing y'all probably take the other guy, but I'm going to take the more deserving player, and I'm going to take De'Aaron Fox, Houston legend. I just want to throw that out there. Bentley knows I love De'Aaron Fox, the best high school basketball player I've ever seen in person. Lightning quick, and that was really his whole game for a while, was just going past people, and now is an elite three-point shooter as well. Solid facilitator, super efficient, decent playmaker, but really as a score-first guard, there's not a lot of people better than him in the league right now. And something I think you love to see in an all-star game is the athleticism that guys like that have, right? It's an up and down game. He's the guy that's just going to go past people. And I think, like I said, has an argument to be the fastest guy in the league with the ball in his hands. And that's always fun to watch. So I'm going to take H-Town legend De'Aaron Fox.
I like it. Yeah, you mentioned the athleticism and putting that on display in an all-star game. And I think De'Aaron Fox is a guy who could also showcase that all-star weekend, right, in some of the skills competitions. So I think that'll be fun watching him, especially in the obstacle course one that highlights speed and passing efficiency and then the ability to shoot as well. I think he can bring a lot of that to the table. Bentley, what are your thoughts on De'Aaron Fox?
He's on my list. He was on my short list of guys to make the team. I think he's the fastest player in the NBA right now with the ball in his hand.
think that's
If
right.
not, he's like top 3 for sure. There may be one rookie or some no-namer that I'm not thinking of. But I love watching De'Aaron Fox play. Ryan mentioned that he's become an elite shooter. That just adds such another lethal dimension to his game. It requires defenders to close out on him so much more quickly, where he can use that shot fake to be able to get a step and just absolutely blaze by them. I am a huge fan of De'Aaron Fox. I wish he didn't play Sacramento so I could watch more of his games. It's kind of unfortunate, West Coast, East Coast thing. Regardless, I'm a big fan of De'Aaron Fox, and I would love to watch him in this All-Star game.
Yeah. For sure. All right. You are on the clock with the next to last pick in the Western Conference.
Man, so I have 2 locks and 3 honorable mentions. I'm going to go with De'Aaron Fox's teammate, Sabonis, who is another one of my personal favorites. He does so many things on a basketball court that are just winning things if you exclude defense. He's an elite offensive basketball player. He's a triple-double machine, right? He's not to Jokic's level of triple-double machine, but he's a threat to have a triple-double basically every other night he goes out and plays. Once again, this is an all-star game. The guy does everything you could possibly want from a player on the offensive end of the court, which is where we're spending most of our focus in the all-star weekend. That's a guy I want on my team. He's a winning player. He's extremely cerebral. He can shoot. He can score. He can pass. He can do all the things that you would want from like kind of an undersized big man. So give me Sabonis. I'm excited to have him on my roster.
That is a little bit of a surprise pick, and it kind of changes who was going to be my next pick because it was also I think it would be an off the radar pick, and I'll mention it in a minute who it was going to be. However, I love Sabonis's game. I think he's it goes without saying that he's one of the most skilled big men in the game. I love the fact that I have him on my fantasy roster as well. I appreciate his ability to threaten a triple-double almost every night, and he plays very efficiently on the offensive end. I think he and De'Aaron Fox are kind of a match made in heaven when it comes to their skill sets complementing each other on that roster. Yeah, I don't have qualms. I didn't have Domantas Sabonis on my All-Star roster, but I don't really have qualms about you putting him on the All-Star roster, other than the fact that now I have to change my surprise last pick. But Ryan, what are your thoughts on Domantas Sabonis making the All-Star game?
I give it a C+. Because there is a better version of Sabonis out there.
Okay.
Who was my surprise pick?
Yeah, okay. All right.
No, I think if you're going to take a player like that, it's one of those two guys. If a guy like that, when the coaches are deciding at the end of the roster, if they're like, we want one of those two guys, I think Sabonis would get the nod in that hypothetical just because of the experience. But I do think there is a better player this year.
Yeah, and as I mentioned a moment ago, that was going to be my surprise pick. I thought it was going to be a surprise pick, but Al Shingun was going to be my last pick here at the end of the roster. I think for all the same reasons that Bentley took Sabonis.
Cody Zeller. Okay. All right.
But I think for all the same reasons that Bentley took Sabonis, I was going to take Al Shingun because I think he's a guy that is a really good facilitator. I like his approach to the offensive side of the ball, and I think he would have been one of those guys that was going to be making some of those kind of pocket passes and alley-oop passes to guys like Anthony Edwards when the reserves came in the game. So that would have been my last pick, but since you made that pick, now I have to kind of scramble a little bit.
Look, I love Alpi. I'm as big an Alpi fan as there is. Don't get me wrong. Next year, Alpi's on my All-Star roster. This year, Sabonis is on my All-Star roster.
So I am going to go with a guy who can play both front and back court for us in the All-Star game. I'm going to take Kawhi Leonard's teammate, Paul George, and put him as the last entry here on the All-Star roster. Great two-way player, but I think in an All-Star game, his offensive ability would be accentuated. We've seen him be able to score from all over the floor. Not quite since the devastating injury he had. He plays a little more below the rim than he did early in his career, but still a guy that can spread the floor, get up and down, plays really well on the fast break. So I'm going to go with Paul George to round out the roster here for the Western Conference. But I want to reemphasize, Al would have been my pick if Demonis hadn't been picked right before. So I think we've got a pretty good roster. I want to get your guys' thoughts on Paul George. Bentley, what do you think about Paul George making the roster?
Paul George is on my honorable mentions list. He's absolutely deserving. He's an LA guy, so he's going to get a ton of votes. He's an extremely popular player as well, so it makes sense to have him on this roster. He's on any given night in the NBA, he's as good as there is. I have no issue with this. I'm totally fine with him being on the roster.
Ryan?
I give this a B- now that I'm grading. But
yeah, what?
That's a surprise for picks 11 and 12. We got letters.
Well, these are the picks that are contentious, right?
Yeah.
Like, to be fair, there's 8 guys where it's super obvious, and then there's everybody else, right?
Yep.
There's 4 guys I think that you could probably take last, and I would be that's fine, and Paul George is one of them. Şengün, I think, was one. I think Karl Anthony Towns is a guy that should be considered, and probably will make it because of a 60-point game happening so close to the All-Star game. I think there's a good chance he gets
recency bias. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that always helps. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. Has had a really good year, an underrated year. I think Desmond Bane's another guy I would have considered. I know Memphis has been bad, but I think both those guys are trying to piece the team together as much as they can. Yeah. And I also think Wembanyama should be considered as well, just off of pure numbers.
I considered him and Chet. I thought both of those should at least get consideration. I wasn't prepared to put them on the All-Star roster. But
yeah, I think there's a couple
conversation.
Yeah, I think there's some bigs that are better than them, but they're not far off. I think they're right underneath that group. Larry Markkinen didn't get brought up. I think another guy that probably should be considered. So really, I said 4 guys, but there's
7 or 8, 9, 10, 11.
I have 4 guys, 2 on my lock to make a roster, and 2 more on my honorable mentions that have not been brought up at all.
Let's hear them.
Devin Booker,
yeah,
Brandon Ingram, Rudy Gobert, and Jamal Murray.
Yeah, I was gonna say Devin Booker instead of De'Aaron Fox, but I was like, oh, y'all will just take Devin Booker, and then I forgot that he wasn't taken. But yeah, he should clearly be on the team. He's almost 50-40-90 this year too, he's been crazy efficient.
His teammate is 50-40-90, not Kevin Durant.
Yeah, there's almost 3 50-40-90 guys on that team, which is insane.
Yep.
2 of them are good. And they're not the 2 doing it.
2 of them are good. Grayson Allen is a good basketball player.
I think when you get down on this list, it's just so much talent in the West. It's so hard. They're deserving guys. Even Jeremy Grant could be considered, right? Jeremy Grant's had a good year. Jalen Williams is a guy I think should get some consideration. Just so many guys. If you had a 15 team, I think there would still be guys where I'm you probably could add him. I think you'd almost have to go to 20 to feel like you got everybody who is probably deserving. Now that I'm thinking about it right now, there's just so many.
I eyeballed Book too. When you selected Sabonis, when I was scrambling to try to figure out who I was going to pick at instead, I eyeballed Book, but we've got, I think, 5. If I remember right, we've got 5 point guards already selected at that point. So I didn't want to take another one. So that was why I went away from Book and went with a guy I think that could play in the front and backcourt on an All-Star roster. So, definitely Booker, certainly worth considering. Back to, I mentioned, giving Chet and Wembanyama some consideration, at least for honorable mention. How fun was them going at each other the other night? That was
Yeah.
pretty fun, right?
Yeah.
In a blowout game, they just said, it's us, it's 1-on-1, and they went at each other, and they both got the better of each other as well.
They've been going at each other since they were like 15, I think, something like around
Yeah.
that age.
Yep.
Well, Wimby was 15 and Chet was a little bit older. But Wimby has historically beat Chet in matchups, and he's been quite a bit younger than Chet too. So I think Chet's maybe got a little chip on his shoulder because in the youth world, he was getting beat pretty bad by the French counterpart there.
Yeah. Sleeping on another big man.
He'd be comfortable.
Question here, is LeBron part because of his play or just because it's him? I think it's both. This year still, I think it's both. I know I mentioned like as he goes on in his career, I think it's going to continue to be like it's him. He's going to make all-star games, even if he's not, one of the most productive players in the league. But curious your guys' thoughts. We put LeBron on the roster. Is it because of his play this year, or is it because it's LeBron James, or is it both? Ryan, you're the one that selected him. So was it because of his play this year, or was it because it's LeBron James, or both?
He would get into the All-Star game solely off of his play. He is a starter, guaranteed starter, because it is him. Yeah, I think that's a pretty clear thing. His caliber of play is All-Star. His image is superstar. But those are two separate things that just happen to still be working together up in his old age. Eventually, he'll just be superstar and not all-star caliber anymore, unless he retires, right, without losing it. But
right,
and he'll probably still make the all-star game because of that. And then we can clearly say, well, it's because of him. It'll be the Yao Ming effect, right? Yao Ming makes it. The years he played like 20 games, he made the all-star game
because of China.
Yeah, because of the voting, right? So
the 40 billion people they have.
Yeah. I mean, he deserves it off of his play this year alone. But,
yeah. Bentley, any dissenting opinion on LeBron?
No, I agree. He's always going to make the All-Star team. He's an All-Star because of his play. He is a starter because of his name.
Yep.
And that may sound like an insult, but it's not, because he's in the 20th year of his career, or 21st, and is still playing at a level deserving of being an all-star player. And he's been such a high caliber of player for so long that because of that, he's getting the votes to be a starter.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, boys, good episode. Appreciate you guys being here. Another successful draft of an all-star roster. Want to pass it around the rooms. So as has been tradition, we make picks in the NFL on Thursday night. I want your two winners this weekend. We're not wagering. We're not laying points. We're just straight. Who's your winners this weekend? All right. Ryan, your way first. Baltimore against Kansas City, and San Francisco against Detroit. Baltimore and San Francisco are both the home teams. Who you got winning in each game?
Well, I'll keep my picks from last week. I'll take the Texans, and I'll take Detroit.
So Baltimore by proxy because they beat the Texans?
Yeah.
Okay. Baltimore and Detroit. All right. Bentley, are you a buyer in the logo conspiracy?
I was really, really hoping that you would ask us to just, like, how are we going to pick the game? And I was going to lay my life on the line for Chiefs +4.
You can still lay it out there.
I'm taking Chiefs. I'm going to take Chiefs +4. That's okay. I'm going to take, because I've said this throughout the week to various people and anyone that will listen to me, really, which is, there's not many in the world that listen to anything I say, which is probably a good thing. All right, okay, Brian, you don't have to agree with me. The one time you choose to agree with me is when I'm being self-deprecating. So everything in my body is telling me that Baltimore is the best team and Baltimore is going to win this weekend. However, Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
I believe with his win this weekend, he went to 10-1-1 against the spread as an underdog, and like 9-1 all time as an underdog. I'm going to take Baltimore to win the game. I think Baltimore is the better team. The strength of the Kansas City offense is their tight ends and their running game. Baltimore has the best defense in the NFL. They have the best linebackers in the NFL, and they have a former number 1 overall draft pick playing the defensive line who's been a run stopper for his entire career, despite not having the sack numbers that people would expect him to in one Jadeveon Clowney.
We'll shout out Columbia.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Shout out, like whatever. We handled the boys from Kentucky when they came down to CLA, tucked the tail between their legs, sent them back. I think Baltimore is going to win. They have a better overall team. So I'm going to take Baltimore.
Okay.
And I think I'm going to go with Detroit.
Woo-hoo!
I think I'm going to go with Detroit. I think I am.
Biting kneecaps. Well, if you're going to tune into the Blitz, I'm going to spoil my picks here. I'm going to go Baltimore in the AFC, and I'm going to go for the reason my dad's alluding to here, man. Kansas City on the season gave up over 5 yards a carry against the run against Buffalo until the fourth quarter when it seemed like Buffalo's O-line was kind of wearing down. They were giving up like 7 yards a carry to Buffalo. And, oh, by the way, Baltimore has the best run offense in the NFL. And they have the best defense in the NFL. So for those two factors, that's why I'm going to go with Baltimore. I don't think Kansas City's going to beat that spread, to be honest. I think Baltimore is going to put a hurting on them this weekend. I just think that those two rivers come to a confluence of Baltimore is going to have their way, I think, with Kansas City this weekend. I think the flash in the pan that we saw last week from the Kansas City offense was really a result of McDermott being in over his head as he's been all season as the defensive mind on that team. And they were missing 4 linebackers and 6 defensive backs. So, I all those factors considered, I'm still wondering if this is the Kansas City Chiefs, if we're going to see the real Kansas City Chiefs this postseason, or if last week was a bit of an anomaly because of that defense. On the NFC side of things, I'm going to stick with just San Francisco is the best team in football, the most complete team at all 3 levels on both sides of the ball. They are really, really good. I worry about Brock Purdy. That's my only X factor with San Francisco is I do worry about Brock Purdy because we've seen from him this year during their 3-game losing streak and in the game against Baltimore, he can be a little bit of Brock Purdy at times. And I don't want that to come out in the NFC Championship game. I'm going to excuse last week where he looked really pedestrian against the Packers for about 3.75 quarters. And then had that game-winning drive late because it was really bad weather last week. And even like Jordan Love, who's been a bit of a supernova down the stretch here, didn't look great. So I'm going to go Baltimore, and I'm going to go San Francisco, and I'm going to pick chalk, despite the fact that I hate picking chalk when it comes to these things. But I'm going to pick chalk this weekend. I haven't picked chalk pretty much the whole way through, but I'm going to break that, and I'm going to pick chalk this weekend. It's going to be Baltimore and San Francisco for me. All right, closing thoughts. Ryan, anything for the crew?
Nope. Enjoyed it as always. Alperin Şengün should be over Sabonis.
Bentley, any thoughts from you on our way out?
I do. I have a small, maybe it's not small. I have a shout out I would like to give everybody who watches this show and has tuned in for, at least one episode knows that I'm a Duke men's basketball fan. And anyone that watches Gary's and I's football show on Tuesday nights knows that I'm a South Carolina men's football fan. Oftentimes those two sports will overlap and I'll root for Duke football, especially when they play Clemson or someone like that. The same goes for South Carolina men's basketball and especially South Carolina women's basketball. So this is 2-part. Tonight, South Carolina is playing LSU in women's basketball. LSU is the defending national champion. Or LSU, defending national champion. Sorry. South Carolina is the best women's college basketball program in the country with Dawn Staley at the helm. South Carolina men's basketball, if you remember, in 2017 made a Final Four run with Frank Martin and Tandarius Thornwell winning SEC Player of the Year, which is rare at a South Carolina school. this year they are recreating some of the magic that they had in 2017 with a different coach. They hired Paris Lamont, who is very famous in the state of South Carolina for wearing quarter zip sweatshirts, right? So quarter zip pullovers. So my favorite thing to do these days is tell people that they just got quarter zipped up. So Tuesday night, Kentucky, number 6 in the country, I believe they were at the time, roll into Columbia, South Carolina, and get their fucking asses handed to them. Shane Beamer and his son sitting courtside, Don Staley in the house. The boys were going crazy. The crowd was in a tizzy the entire evening. They stormed the court. The school got fined $100,000. They sent the kids from 1,000% worth it. They sent the boys back to Kentucky. Freaking Coach Cal came down to the state of South Carolina and did not know what to do. That was a team coming in averaging, I believe, 92 points a game, and they scored in the 60s. I mean, it was absolutely electric. It's a wonderful time to be a South Carolina fan. I love being a South Carolina fan, man. Whether it's football or basketball, it's electric. Duke unfortunately stumbled recently, but whatever. Came back and got a win against Louisville, which all-time bad program right now. But yeah, I just wanted to shout out the South Carolina men's and women's basketball programs. They're an elite company right now, especially the women's team, but the men's team is on the up and up. Gigi Jackson, this is an NBA show, so Gigi Jackson, who had back-to-back 20-point games in the NBA last week for the Memphis Grizzlies, is South Carolina alum is the wrong word, but he was the youngest player in last year's draft coming out of South Carolina. Exactly. He played last year. He went toe-to-toe with Brandon Miller. If you remember, late in the season, or I believe it was in the SEC tournament, Brandon Miller had 41 in the game against South Carolina, including the overtime game winner when he was facing those allegations of, the whole off-court, the gun incident or whatever. But he had 41 in the game, and he went toe-to-toe with Gigi Jackson at South Carolina. Yeah, it's a good time to be a Gamecock, boys.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you guys. Appreciate the comments. Appreciate the participation. This has been our Western Conference All-Star Game Draft edition of Backyard Buckets, brought to you by Backyard Sports. Check us out on the Blitz in about 5 minutes. We'll be talking football. On that note, we are out.